We're now recording and everyone from the lobby is in the meeting.
Okay, thank you very much, Heidi. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Northern Beaches Local Planning Panel for Wednesday, the 16th of October. Just for the benefit of those of you who haven't attended a local planning panel meeting before, I'll just give you a quick rundown of who we are and what we do. So it'll give you a bit of context. Basically, back in 2018, the state government made local planning panels mandatory for all Sydney councils and also Wollongong City Council. The aim of the panels is to provide an increased level of accountability and ensure independent oversight leads to better planning outcomes, particularly for certain developments that are controversial or sensitive or involve a potential or real conflict of interest for council or indeed its employees. The functions of the panels in relation to matters referred to it are to provide an independent open forum for people and groups to hear and make submissions about development proposals that have been referred to it, to consider and determine development applications, application modifications, and reviews of applications referred to it. And there's a ministerial direction that defines what those are. In addition to that, the Minister has required that planning panels provide recommendations to councils on planning proposals, which are otherwise called rezonings by many people, and any other development matter that may be referred to it. There's a series of statutory rules that govern our operation through a code of conduct and operational procedures, and those details are available on Council's website. The process that's pursued is that council officers assess a development application as per normal, but then they report that to the local planning panel, and then the planning panel makes an independent determination. One of the things that's important to note is that the panel does not set policy, but works within the legal framework and policy set by council, the state government and the courts. The planning panel in this case, or always, includes 4 members, and that's a chairperson. In this case, it's myself, David Crofts, and I'm an independent expert, a community member, and for this meeting, Frank Bush is the community member, and 2 independent expert members, and they are, in this case, Tara Crayson and David Epstein. The expert panel members are required to have expertise in urban design, planning, or some other related field, and they have been identified through a selection process that was run by the state government. The community members are representatives of the local community, but are not necessarily an expert in a particular field. The format that we follow is that we've all undertaken an on-site inspection, either in person or electronically, depending on the circumstances. A public panel meeting is held, which is what we're doing at the moment for interested people and groups to hear and make submissions. A closed panel session is then held for the panel to deliberate and determine applications, and also to determine what advice they wish to make on planning proposals. And then several days later, a public announcement of the determination is made once council has undertaken the procedural things it needs to do prior to that. Just some brief matters. Firstly, the public meeting is an opportunity to make oral submissions. They're not a place for debate or to or fro discussion between the applicant and the objectors. So they're an opportunity for you to inform the panel as to your views, and the panel can ask questions. The public meetings are video and audio recorded. The recordings are live streamed and published on council's website. So by participating, essentially you're consenting for that to occur. And once all of the speakers in relation to matters on the agenda are finished, I will close the public meeting and the panel will move into a closed session to deliberate and determine all matters on the agenda. So that's a quick snapshot of what we do. And now I'd like to move on to the agenda itself. And just excuse me for a minute because my screen has decided to maximize itself and I've got no idea what's going on. So moving on to the agenda itself. Firstly, an acknowledgement of country. As a sign of respect, the Northern Beaches Planning Panel acknowledges the traditional custodians of these lands upon which we gather and pays respect to elders past, present and emerging. Apologies and declarations of interest. I haven't received any apologies for the meeting and I have received written declarations of interest from all the panel members, and there's been no conflicts of interest been identified by them, but just for the public record, I'll just ask each individually whether or not they have a conflict of interest in relation to any matter. Cara Crayson, do you have any conflicts?
No, I have no conflicts of interest.
Okay. David Epstein?
No.
Okay, thank you. And Frank Bush? Do you have any, Frank, do you have any conflicts of interest?
Sorry, I was muted. No,
Oh,
I don't.
sorry. Okay, thanks, Frank. And neither do I. So with that, by way of introduction, I'll just deal with the minutes of the previous meeting. The panel notes that the minutes of the Northern Beaches Planning Panel meeting of the 2nd of October were adopted by the chairperson and have been posted on Council's website. That brings us to the first item on the agenda, and that relates to a planning proposal for 29 and 31 Moore Road and 64 Undercliff Road Freshwater. The planning proposal seeks to amend Schedule 1, which relates to additional permitted uses under the Warringah LEP to facilitate the development of hotel accommodation integrated with the existing Harbour Hotel and Bottle Shop. I have 4 objectors that are listed on the agenda to speak, as well as some representatives of the applicant. So the first objector I have is Jordan Reesers. Jordan, are you online, please?
Yep, I am online. So
okay, we're in your hands. Can I just mention before we start, first thing is that if you can try and keep your presentation to a maximum of 3 minutes.
Yep.
In addition to that, we've read everyone's submission, so you don't need to repeat any submissions verbatim. What's important is that anyone presenting really focuses on the main points they have, so that message comes through to the panel clearly to us. So thanks very much.
So Heidi, could you just give me the ability to share my screen, please?
Yeah. David confirming that they can give a presentation.
Yes, that's okay. Yes, as long as they don't exceed the time, please. Jordan, we don't have any sharing occurring yet.
I'm just changing the
sorry
settings
about that.
quickly.
Yes,
sorry,
okay.
Sorry.
Did you want to give that a go now?
Yep. Just one sec. Oh, hang on. I think if that works. Oh, okay. All right. I'm not going to be able to share because Teams wants to ask for my thing, but I can send this send this round later. Obviously,
yeah. If you just email it through to Heidi, please.
Yep, I can do that. So look, my concern, I suppose, that I wanted to raise is in response to parking and traffic concerns that have been raised by the residents. And there was obviously a council response, which sort of touched 4 key areas. I won't go through all of them, but you know, the first one is that the traffic impacts from the hotel aren't that major, but the pub is likely to cause, you know, already from the permissible use more traffic. The transport plan impact is lower than it should be is another summary point. Traffic from accommodation doesn't warrant refusal, and that local bus services are adequate. So when you sort of are talking about transport and traffic, the council has responded to those key points. And I suppose my point is this, that creating a new car park will create an impact on traffic that hasn't been discussed as part of the plan. The first component of that is that the council already mentioned that medium rigid vehicles need to be able to get into the site, and all of that traffic obviously will go through Moore Road, in and out of Moore Road. And so I think the consideration of the impact beyond just the hotel, it's not just the hotel, it's the pub traffic and everything else that's going to be involved with supplying the pub in its new configuration. Also, the council response to parking only takes into account traffic from the additional accommodation. It doesn't take into account that additional traffic will come as a result of the change of the layout of the parking that's being created. So currently people who are wanting to park don't need to enter the car park if it's full. You can see it, where in future, obviously, people will have to go travel through the park to find a spot. So you get this circular thing that happens with parking. And obviously, the traffic exiting the hotel to Moore Road at the moment is facing downhill. It's quite easy to see if there's pedestrians or traffic, but going forward, that will be facing uphill, and it'll be hemmed in on both sides. And I think you've got to consider children on e-bikes and the footpath, the shared path that the council has proposed along there as well. Finally, I think the traffic behaviour will change with underground parking, and I don't think that can be ignored. With 750 people on site after the renovations and more underground spaces, it will really change the behaviour of the traffic. I talked about circulation, but for the traffic who don't find a park, obviously that is a challenge, and then people will be waiting to turn right towards the beach to find more parking across the cycle path, and that could create backups, not just through the car park, but into Charles Street as well. And then finally, I think it also needs to be considered the traffic from the excavation works. And we learned a lot, I think, from the Harbord diggers, but what happens in residential streets with that traffic. So just in summary, from my perspective, I think that if the LEP is amended, shared underground parking is a requirement. And when considering the changes to the LEP, consideration should include the whole site, not just the hotel, which is what's been happening at the moment, because the car park is a shared car park across both things, or both developments, obviously. And I think the question is really whether that additional concentration of traffic should be a factor for the approval of the site. So I have some photos and stuff which I'll share in the presentation.
Great. Thank you very much, Jordan. Can I just mention too, if you wouldn't mind just staying online, what I'll do is I'll ask all the speakers, objectives to make their presentation. Then I'll ask any panel members if they've got questions at the end of all of it.
Yep. No
Thank you. But if you wouldn't mind turning you have muted your microphone. Great. Thank you. Ashwin Field, I can see you're online. So Ashwin, we're in your hands, please.
Hi. Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone. I'd like to make 3 points. The first is around the intensification of commercial usage in what is fundamentally a very quiet residential area. Council highlights in their submission that the permitted use on the current R2 sites is exceptional and doesn't set any broader precedent. And that exception was made for a quiet suburban pub which served the local community and sat in a quiet residential neighbourhood. But what we've seen is that this limited exception has metastasised first with the redevelopment and then the upstairs rebuild and the recording studio, which is currently underway. You're now being asked to affirm a further extension to permit the development of a large motel and pool complex. And let's not kid ourselves, 37 rooms is not small boutique accommodation. That seems like overreach on the current permitted uses sites, the pub and the car park, and even more so on the adjacent low-rise residential site, number 64. This feels like an extraordinary intensification of commercial usage on what are still R2 sites in what is still a quiet residential neighbourhood, and which will attach these properties forever, whether these applicants choose to develop or sell in whole or in part. Once done, this can't be undone, which must require a higher bar on the applicant and the council. Second, there's been a lack of objective and balanced appraisal. The council has accepted at face value and substantially reproduced the applicant's submissions in the materials provided to you, whereas the community's objections have been reduced to a short table and summarily dismissed. If I can pick up three of those on residential character, the council's response is that the proposed hotel accommodation is compatible with the existing pub use, being on the same land under the same ownership. But the proposed motel and pool complex would sit on what is currently the car park and sprawl into the adjacent low-rise residential site number 64. There's never been a motel and pool complex on these sites. I'm not aware there's ever been a motel and pool complex in this suburb. And this motel and pool complex will not be under the same licence conditions that currently provide residents some level of protection against noise and antisocial behaviour emanating from the pub. On noise impacts, the council says the council's health team have not raised any noise concerns regarding the proposal. So there's been no actual assessment, there's been no acoustic report, there's no binding design, but council's confident that the 37-room motel and pool complex will have zero noise footprint, given skillful design techniques and by minimising openings. And then the loss of low-rise residential affordable rental property. The proposal, according to council, is not associated with any loss of existing affordable rental housing, does not involve the loss of any residential land. But clearly rezoning number 64 to facilitate knocking down the current low-rise residential rental property and build a motel does in fact do those things. We can't know how many objections there would have been if council had embarked on a more appropriate community engagement, but 90+ objections from an initial notification footprint of just 19 non-applicant properties over just 4 weeks deserves mention. And the considered objections raised by our neighbours deserve a more thorough and balanced appraisal. And last off, independence matters. This is a significant proposal that will further intensify commercial usage on an R2 site in what is otherwise still a quiet residential area. The decision process has been fragmented and reduced to a box-ticking exercise. There's been no serious consideration of community objections. There's been no critical appraisal of claims by the applicant. However, there's been reliance on a future DA process when we know what will happen if the council raise any actual objections, as they did in relation to noise in the last supersizing application. So we welcome the involvement of this independent panel. I'm comforted by reading the guidance provided around all parties being dealt with fairly. No suggestion of preferential or unfavourable treatment. The problem is, in respect to this process and material presented to you, I think, well, independent isn't the word that springs to mind. The applicant has had literally years to develop their application, background the council, screen paid experts to support their case. Whereas we've had a very limited subset of the community given 2 weeks, reluctantly extended to 4 weeks, and with the council response rushed out just over a week after ahead of this October hearing, which seems undue haste, if I may say. And the applicant's submission has been essentially endorsed, reproduced, and even expanded on by council. Even technical objections from council.
Ashwin, you're up to 4 minutes now, so if you can
have apparently been resolved behind closed doors. So in short, I don't think there is an independent affirmative decision that can be made there, but there are independent outcomes possible. You can push back pending more genuine community engagement. You can reject the rezoning by stealth and loss of residential rental on number 64. You require a smaller footprint, larger rooms, and no rooftop pool, which would be family-friendly small boutique, or preferably just say no and let the applicant try an application for commercial rezoning, because that's the substance of what is being sought here.
Ashwin, can you close off? Thank you very much. The next speaker I have is Anna, and I'm not sure if I've pronounced your surname properly. Is Superius?
Superius.
Superius, sorry. Okay, so we're in your hands. Thank you.
Okay, I have 2 contentions. Firstly, that our freshwater basin and this site specifically is not a suitable location for a hotel due to incompatibility with the R2 zoning and the nature of the area. And secondly, that demolition of housing to make way for a hotel is unacceptable and inconsistent with housing policy. Councillors either dismiss community members' concerns or assess them irrelevant to these proceedings. However, in Council's own submissions on planning controls in response to proposed changes to the LEP by New South Wales Government, Council itself raised similar concerns with changing the settings in R2 zones, and these include rezoning by stealth, insufficient justification, and impact on local character. It is inconsistent that these issues are dismissed in relation to this application, particularly when this proposal exceeds the impact of the changes proposed by the New South Wales Government. I have identified the following errors in the expert reports provided, incorrect facts and inconsistencies that undermine Council's support for this proposal. For example, Ashwin's already raised the loss of affordable housing at residential housing at 64 Undercliff Road. The transport study is wholly accepted despite incorrectly stating that Freshwater has 3 public bus routes to it. One's the 167 runs Brookvale to Manly, the 165X runs only in peak hour to CBD and to and from the CBD, and the 3rd bus is a school bus. The suggestions that the hotel will act as an acoustic barrier, this is obviously untrue for Moore Road and throughout the freshwater bowl, ignores noise associated with exit points, traffic and movement of people. References to the 24-hour economy are irrelevant. Freshwater is not part of the 24-hour economy. Similarly, any references about alignment with the Greater Sydney Region Plan and the Northern District Plan are irrelevant. I invite you to look at the field submission for expansion on that. The Northern Beaches Local Strategic Planning Statement beyond 2040 does support promoting tourism. However, it also refers to centres and neighbourhoods designed to reflect local character and lifestyle, and specifically identifies Freshwater as one of these centres, characterised as a quiet, family-centred village with a relaxed beachside lifestyle. Brookvale is identified as an employment centre. Dee Why and Manly as seaside locales of note. Mention of tourism is in relation to Manly alone. The Northern Beaches destination management is quoted as in support. Nowhere in this document does it suggest putting hotels in the middle of an R2 area. In fact, page 44 of the plan suggests that the weakness of the market is in the northern end of the beaches, not the southern end. And the document names Manly, Narrabeen and Brookvale as places to consider, not Freshwater. It also notes the lack of experiential accommodation, which this is not. Council refutes community concerns that hotel accommodation is not consistent with the quiet, family-friendly, relaxed and residential character of the area, simply by reference to the compatibility of accommodation with the pub. However, a pub has amenity for the community. A hotel has benefit only to those who own or stay in it. The parking report references availability of on both sides of Charles Street. In fact, the eastern side is now a loading zone and drop zone, now necessary because of the issues with parking. This report did not take account of additional traffic soon to be generated by the opening of the upstairs of the pub. Any development must be of a scale inconsistent with a low density environment. Scale intensification will result from any hotel built on the site. No hotel could comply with the R2 controls, so an affirmative decision today means limits would be breached regarding setbacks, heights, land to building ratios. The building envelope is 5 metres, and 3 stories, a minimum of 9 metres. Further, the precedent this sets is that mere proximity to the pub is all that is required to justify the additional permitted use. A floodgates argument is not hyperbolic. It is inevitable that over time we will end up with creeping development, and that this is the start of a second unplanned, unzoned commercial precinct in Freshwater.
Anna, can you close off now, please?
A hotel by definition does not meet the day-to-day needs of the community. Instead, it meets the temporary needs of visitors, and based on feedback received by residents themselves, it will actively work against their day-to-day needs for quiet enjoyment of their properties. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker I have is Gabby Timms. And Gabby, I can see you're online. And Anna, would you mind turning your microphone off, just so it stops noise from the background? Okay, Gabby, can you hear me okay? Yes, okay. Okay, we're in your hands. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Council strongly recommended the applicant engage in community consultation with the neighbouring property owners regarding this proposal. And as one of the pub's closest neighbours, directly opposite the main entry to the pub, I wish the panel to know, disappointingly, the applicant has never attempted to make contact directly with me regarding the proposal or any previous DAs. The applicant has been working on this current proposal or concept for more than 4 years. Why would council accept a concept plan for such a significant development in a residential area? It is bulky and excessive. The proposed intensification of the site will overpower the local amenity, not to mention the existing heritage building. The applicant's current approved DA provides an entertainment space at the expense of accommodation opportunities, increasing the current patron floor space by 74%. It is expected this will have a noticeable impact on the local amenity, with increased number of patrons coming to and from the site, increased vehicle traffic to and from the site, which is currently poorly managed in my opinion. While council consider this proposal without understanding the full impacts to the local amenity of the current DA. My question to the panel is, in whose interest is this concept? Does the proposal benefit the local residents and their amenity as the R2 protects us? The number of submissions against the proposal overwhelmingly answers this question. The residents represent the majority of the neighbourhood. There is just one pub and the remainder of the community are the residents. So whose interest is the application? The community is asking the panel to use the R2 zoning principles to protect their amenity. The only interest this proposal serves is a commercial gain to the applicant at the detriment to the loved, low-key and relaxed local amenity the residents of Freshwater have been drawn to for decades. The hotel accommodation proposal seeks to sneak under the R2 zoning. The zoning is there primarily to protect the day-to-day needs and housing of its residents. The zoning is there precisely to protect residents from overdevelopment, which is exactly what this proposal is. Overdevelopment of a site not zoned for the proposed purpose. Why should this proposal be considered when the community overwhelmingly objects? The zoning doesn't allow for it. There's no evidence, apart from the applicant saying so, to suggest hotel accommodation is required in Freshwater, where Manly is saturated with accommodation options. Why, when we're in a housing crisis with shortage for long-term accommodation, allow the applicant to remove exactly that from the local community? With a large patron number increase we're about to experience and intensification that would undoubtedly result in serious impacts that will further degrade the residential amenity, which is in contrary to the aims of the WLEP, Council should not be considering this proposal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Gabby. Those 4 speakers are the objective speakers I have. I might just open now to panel members to see if you have any questions at this stage. None? Okay.
I don't have any
Yes.
questions, David, but
Yes.
it might be helpful just by some of the comments made to explain the process here, how we're giving advice and
I'm going to do that.
Okay,
in a moment.
great.
Thank you. Okay. I might just go on to the applicants and see whether or not the applicants wish to make a presentation at this stage or answer any queries, or just want to open for the panel questions. I know Greg Boston and Glenn Piper there. Greg, I might ask you to act as ringmaster there. I'm not quite sure whether both of you are presenting or.
Yeah, look, I was proposing to do most of the talking, but look, if the panel was going to sort of outline what the process is in terms of your involvement today and the fact that this is simply a situation where it's going to be forwarded to the Department of Planning.
I'm planning to do that. So you don't have any commentary you want to make at this stage?
Oh, look, my only commentary is we've prepared a submission to the panel, which I believe you have received, which is effectively endorsing the report that is before you today, including the recommendation that the pub use not extend over onto number 64, which is the additional lot that is being incorporated in relation to the planning proposal. As the panel knows, pubs have been permissible across all the land holding other than number 64 for some time. The hotel operator first opened in 1928, so it's been there for a very long time. And in relation to the R2 zoning, we acknowledge that that is the underlying zoning. However, pubs have been the predominant use on the site for a significant amount of time. And in relation to number 64, there's a residential flat building there which has existing use rights. So again, the established use isn't consistent with what you would ordinarily anticipate in an R2 zone. The only part of Council's recommendation that we do ask the panel to put their mind to is extending the hotel and motel accommodation permissibility across the entire land holding. The intention is, and no objection would be raised to a requirement that the allotments get consolidated as part of the planning proposal process. With the current owners of the hotel continuing to be the owners and the operators of any future motel accommodation on the site. We think that in terms of the symmetry that is afforded through the planning proposal in relation to providing basement car parking, that the permissibility extending across the whole land holding not only facilitates permissible access through the site between Charles and also the other street frontages, but also provides for the effective management by way of a consolidated operational plan of management to occur across the entire land holding. So we just think that there's certainly some some benefit in extending that permissibility across the entire landholding.
Okay. Thank you. Yep, you were going to say something else, sorry?
Yeah, look, that was it. Look, in terms of the amenity impacts that have been raised, obviously the concept plans that were prepared are simply to show what potentially could in the future be constructed on the site. It certainly wouldn't be locked in as part of this this planning proposal. The fundamental is to relocate what is currently above ground car parking and servicing associated with the hotel into a basement, where a lot of those external amenity impacts can be a lot more appropriately managed in terms of noise and light spill and the like. So we say that there's certainly some symmetry benefits in relation to what is before you. Apart from that, we're really here to answer any questions that the panel might have.
Okay, well, before I go over to the panel, I will outline just the process. As I mentioned earlier in the introduction, the role of the panel as far as planning proposals are concerned is to provide recommendations to council, unlike DAs or development applications, where we actually have a determination power of approving, refusing, or whatever with a development application. So my understanding of the process so far is the council has undertaken what's called a non-statutory public exhibition of the planning proposal. So they've put it out there to the community. They've received submissions back. We've had the opportunity to read those submissions. That the matter has come to us with a council report for us to consider and for us to make a recommendation to council. Following that, if council decides to proceed with the planning proposal, then it will be submitted to the Department of Planning for what's called a gateway determination. So the Department of Planning reviews the proposal. They may ask some questions of council and seek clarification and some changes, or they might decide that they don't believe it should continue. Once let's assume that the gateway determination is positive, the matter then comes back to council. The council then conducts a public exhibition, which is a statutory public exhibition, and seeks comment on the planning proposal. So that's a formal process, and that comment then is considered by council, and council then makes a decision as to whether or not the rezoning should proceed, or the planning proposal should proceed or not. Let's assume the planning proposal does actually proceed. It becomes part of the local environmental plan. Then what would need to happen is that if the owner wished to develop the land, they would need to lodge a development application. That development application would then need to go to public exhibition for community comment on the detail of that. Then that development application, depending on its value, would either go to council, come to the planning panel, or go to the regional planning panel for a determination. So there's a long path yet to go, and at the moment, as I mentioned, there's been one non-statutory public exhibition. We're now in the loop to provide advice to council, and then there are actually two public exhibitions to follow if the development was to proceed. One relates to the planning proposal, and the other one would relate to any development application that is lodged by a developer or the owner of the land. And each of those public exhibition processes, of course, are at higher degrees of detail each time, because obviously a planning proposal is just to deal with the zoning of the land and some of the parameters around that, whereas a development application deals with the actual details of the development per se. So I hope that helps sort of outline in a very cursory way how the process might work from here on in if this proceeded to development. However, there's no guarantee it will go that far. the planning proposal may not proceed, or if the development application was lodged, council may decide to refuse that application, or whoever the consent authority happens to be at that stage. So still a long path to go in terms of what might happen to the land over time. I hope that gives everyone a bit of a quick overview of it. I'd now like to open up to the panel to see if they've got any questions of the applicant or any further questions of any of the objectors, please. Anyone like to go first?
I can go
Tara?
first if you like.
Thank you.
Sure. Greg, I probably just want to get some clarification in terms of the land uses across different parts of the site. And I know what you've submitted is different to what council is recommending here. And I know we're only giving advice on this, but noting that the indicative plans are just to inform a potential for that consideration of use. The thing that I noticed in them is 2 basement car parks. Obviously, that there would be intention to replace the current above ground car park for the pub within one of the 2 basements. And I'm not sure which, in the indicative concept, which level was for the motel accommodation and which level of basement parking might have been for the pub use. And also, which access point, because there's 2, one looks like from the concept, it would go through the location where the bottle shop is at the moment. The other obviously is in the same location as the entry into the above ground park. So I guess the question that I'm getting to here is, when I look at the plans, and I know they're just indicative, you've got a vehicle access ramps and associated pedestrian access that crosses the different parts of the site that on council's proposal is only identifying particular types of use. So, for instance, the site of the existing residential flat building to be demolished, in council's recommendation, they're indicating that a pub use, that they wouldn't be supporting a pub use there. But if any of the basement car parking is for the pub, obviously you would need to have that use as permissible. I guess in some respect, if you were intending to rely on any part, any stratum, I guess, of that part of that lot for a use other than the motel accommodation. And subsequently, if you also look at the access point and a little bit of the indicative car park layout that sits around where the existing bottle shop is, if the intention was for that to be for the motel accommodation and that's not permitted via the planning proposal on that part of the site, is there an issue with the car parking, the access there too, with the crossover in uses? So I guess that's my main question in relation to that.
Just before Greg answers, can I ask Jeffrey Lowe and Ted, could you both turn your microphones off, please? Just that we're getting background noise.
Oh, shit.
So I'm not sure who Ted is, but if you could turn yours off as well. Okay, it looks like the background noise is gone. So, Greg, would you like to answer the question, please?
Yeah, no, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, look, you've made a really good point, and that was the point that I was trying to make, and hopefully I did, in relation to just restricting the hotel and motel use to the portions of the site. I think page 42 of the agenda just shows a sort of an allotment plan that identifies where council wants to restrict the hotel and motel use. The issue is what's happening below the surface of the land. So it's the basement access, and also the car parking, and the fact that that needs to be the uses to which the car parking relates needs to be permissible on that portion of the land. So we just think it's overly restrictive in relation to what council is trying to achieve in restricting the hotel and motel accommodation to one portion. And yeah, you're absolutely right in relation to not having pubs as a permissible use on 64 Undercliff Road for exactly the same reason. There's no intention to expand the above ground pub operations onto that portion of the site. But you're right, there may well be car parking associated with the pub sitting on that particular land holding. And these, of course, are in relation to the ultimate distribution of the uses across the land. That's a matter that council has absolute control over in relation to the subsequent development applications. So as submitted, the planning proposal was keeping things simple, and that is introducing number 64 as part of the overall land holding, and extending pubs and also the hotel and motel accommodation across the entire land holding. And when the hotel was originally built back in 1928, there was a hotel and motel component associated with the use, and that has since been effectively abandoned just through it no longer operating. But historically, there's been hotel, motel and pub uses across the entire land holding other than number 64, which we are proposing to introduce. So to keep it simple, we'd like to progress the planning proposal as submitted for exactly the reason that you've just indicated, and that is just to keep things simple in terms of enabling the orderly and economic development of the land.
Okay, thank you.
I had one further question, David, which
Yes.
could partly be to Greg or council. So it also relates to, this is in the council assessment report, to built form, site-specific built form controls being developed, presumably by council, as an amendment to the DCP and to be exhibited concurrently with any planning proposal, should it proceed that way and pass Gateway. There's a timeline that's included in the council report. Obviously, we're in October at the moment. They're anticipating a commencement date of Gateway determination February and having it on exhibition in April. So I guess my question here is, what is the status of the preparation of the built form controls in the DCP in order to meet that time frame? Would that be submitted with the request for a gateway determination? Would it just be dependent on a gateway determination being issued? And is there then enough time to prepare that by public exhibition? And what involvement does the applicant have? Has it drafted one? What involvement is there between council and the applicant in developing the site-specific DCP?
Hi, Clara. I can speak to that quickly. I'm the assessment planner for the planning proposal. It would be, those site-specific controls would be something that we explore from this point on, pending the decision of council and LPP, and will be exhibited along during the statutory exhibition stage. Yes.
So has the other part of the question was, has the applicant prepared anything?
No, this will be something
that
we discuss with our urban design planners and DCP team.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The first we knew about any site-specific DCP provisions was when the report came out.
Okay.
But certainly the indicative plans attempt to provide for an appropriate contextual fit, I guess, in terms of compliant with the 8.5 metre building height standard that applies to the land, and there's no proposal to change that. And then maintaining a 3 metre setback to that eastern boundary and a compliant setback to the frontage as it relates to a secondary frontage.
Okay, thanks for that. Any other questions from panel members?
No, not from me. Thank you.
No.
Frank? No, I don't have any. Okay, can I thank you all very much? As I mentioned, that the panel, after the public meeting, we have a closed session amongst panel members and where we deliberate on the matter. We'll make a decision as to what our recommendation to council will be, and then that information will become public in a few days from now once council's gone through some processes that they need to go through. And as I also mentioned, we're making a recommendation to council. We don't determine the matter. And then once council's made a decision, if they make a decision in the positive, then it goes off to the Department of Planning for a gateway decision. And I won't go into the rest of the process, but there's quite a process that then follows. So I hope that helps provide a bit of context, particularly for the committee members who are listening. But look, thank you very much. We'll certainly consider everything you've said, and also we have had access to all the submissions and read those, so we've had the benefit of the advice from there as well as inspecting the site. I'll move on now to the next item on the agenda, which is item 4.2. And that is DA 2023/1395, 1010, 1012 and 1014 Pittwater Road, Collaroy. It's demolition works and construction of shop top housing. I have two speakers who are listed, as well as the two representatives of the applicant. The first speaker I have is the owner of Unit 226 Ocean Grove. If you're online.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, don't know if you caught what I said earlier, but if you can try and limit your presentation to about 3 minutes or so, please you don't need to repeat what's in your submission. If you've made a submission to us, and I'm pretty sure you have, because you've had the opportunity to read it, just focus on what you think are the major points that you think we'd benefit from hearing from you today. So in your hands, thank you very much.
Great, thank you, David, for that. I'd firstly like to thank the panel for the opportunity to speak. So I am the owner-occupier of Unit 226 Ocean Grove, Collaroy, and would like to bring attention to the panel to the rear boundary of one of the applicant's lots, being 1014 Pittwater Road, Collaroy, which doesn't meet the rear boundary setbacks mandated in the DCP and ADG. Speaking briefly on the design of the subject site, the proposed development fully blocks my window located at the western elevation at 26 Ocean Grove by an eastern wall proposed by the applicant, which is located at 1014 Pittwater Road. This eastern wall proposed also blocks the window of Unit 5, 26 Ocean Grove. This occurs on the rear boundary of 1014 Pittwater Road. The proposed development therefore has a nil rear boundary setback at multiple levels towards 26 Ocean Grove. As a result, the building is hard against my property and blocks windows, which leads to rooms and interiors with no natural light. The DCP and ADG require at least a 6-meter rear setback. If the correct setback was applied, the windows would not be blocked and the rooms would receive natural light. There are two other adjacent properties to the left of the site, being 1016 and 1018 Pittwater Road, that do observe the rear boundary setback towards 26 Ocean Grove. The assessment report, however, does not examine or even mention the rear boundary setback requirements of 1014 Pittwater Road. Neither does the report lay out any argument or justification why they should not be observing the required setback, particularly given the adverse impact on neighbours. There is no merit in a wall built hardtop against the rear boundary at multiple levels, blocking neighbours' windows. To conclude, it is wrong for a development that does not meet the regulations to be approved. And generally speaking, I'm not against the site being developed and would have no objections if the rear boundary setback to 26 Ocean Grove is correctly applied. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your presentation. The next person I've got listed is Anthony Haynes. Anthony, I can see you're online. And
Yep,
we're in
yep,
your
I am.
hands. Thank you.
Great, thanks, David. I suppose.
Sorry, Anthony, your sound's disappeared. Either that or mine's disappeared. No one, anyone else here?
No.
No. No. You were there at the beginning and then you dropped out. No, sorry. No, sorry, Anthony. What I might do is while you're playing with the technology to see what the problem is, I might ask panel members, do you have any questions of the first speaker?
Yes, David,
Yes,
could I
Frank.
ask the first speaker whether he is the original owner of his unit? In other words, did he buy it straight off the plan or straight from the developer? Because that's the question of what that room was approved for.
Okay, so can we have a response, please?
Thanks, Frank. I bought the property a year ago, so after.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions at this stage? Cara, your microphone's off.
Sorry. Is he aware of when, like, the year of the construction of that development, or does he have any approved plans? I mean, we can ask council the same question, but just wondering from the owner if he has any of those details.
No, sorry, Cara, I don't.
Great, thank you. I think Anthony's back online because I saw the screen indicate that. Would you like to say something, Anthony, so I can just check it? No, that's really odd because it had a blue circle around your screen there, which indicated that something was coming through.
I can see him, but I can't hear him.
it's a
So it might be
microphone
to
issue.
do with his headset.
Do you want to try and mute it and just turn it back on, unmute it, and just see if that does the trick?
Hello.
Yep. Yes.
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 Hey,
There's
all
no
right.
charge for that service. Okay.
I'll be quick so I
Yes.
don't go off again. So yeah, so I'm the owner occupier of Unit 5, so 26. So the fact that, and I probably won't cover off too much of what my neighbour did, but yeah, in essence, it's the rear boundary of lot 1014, which is a rear boundary, and there is no setback from that rear boundary onto 26 Ocean Grove. And as if we look at the previous developments at 1016, 1018 and 1020, they have all complied with a setback of, it appears to be 6 metres. Yeah, so there seems to be no justification as to why there's no compliance with the setback rules here. And yeah, it does impact on me. It partially blocks a window in my unit, and it actually it comes right up to my balcony as well, which has certain security risks from my point of view. Yeah, I suppose the other point I'll make, is that when the DA initially went in, it was massively above all the requirements, and it seems to be a strategy that's massively above, so that we go and make submissions and they come down a bit, but not completely compliant with the regulations. So yeah, I mean, I think my view is that the setbacks should be applied as they are to 1016, 1018 and 1020. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Panel members, do you have any questions?
Not of Anthony, but I've got some questions of council in relation to these issues.
Yeah, and perhaps
Yes.
the applicant, if they're going to comment on any of this, they could also advise how they've
Okay.
gone
Well,
about the design
what we might
process.
do is, if we don't have any questions of the objectors, we might move on to the applicant and their representatives first. So I've got Greg Boston and also Mo Jara. Hopefully I'll pronounce your surname correctly, Mo.
Yes,
so
correct.
Greg, once again, would you mind being ringmaster and coordinating at your end, please?
Sure. Yep. No worries. Look, I'll be the spokesperson. So Sean Gartner, the architect, unfortunately can't be here today. He had a conflict with another matter, but look, we're here to primarily speak in support of the recommendation and any questions that the panel might have. We've reviewed the draft conditions. We raised no objections to any of the conditions as drafted, and just acknowledge the fact that the application has been through an extended process of assessment with council, and that a number of issues have been raised through that assessment process, including from the Design and Sustainability Advisory Panel, with the plans before you today reflecting what we say is a considered response to all of the issues that have been raised through the process. Including the need to retain the significant tree towards the rear of the property. In relation to the concerns raised by the immediately adjoining property to the east of the site at 26 Ocean Grove, yes, it is an awkward relationship where you've got their development constructed to a nil setback. The room or the rooms that are impacted by the development have glass blocks rather than anything that's ventilated. So I can only assume on that basis that it was always anticipated that potentially development would extend to the boundary, and that they weren't approved as habitable rooms, but council staff may well have more detail in relation to that. The habitable components of the development certainly set back the 6 metres from that common boundary, with just the car parking and I think the stormwater system extending to that nil setback. The application does rely on a clause 4.6 variation request in support of the height breach. The original proposal did have an additional residential level, which has been removed through discussions with council. And certainly the Design and Sustainability Panel thought that the retention of rooftop communal open space was a good thing for this particular site and for the amenity of the development generally, on the basis that the lift core access and the elements that breach the height control are located well back from the Pittwater Road frontage, where they won't have an impact in terms of streetscape. And on that basis, council has reviewed the clause 4.6 and considers it to be well founded. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions that the panel might have in relation to that particular component. Apart from that, happy to answer any other questions.
Okay. Any other questions at all from panel members?
Oh, well, I've got,
yes,
I guess, the questions going back to this issue of blocking natural light. Yes, there's obviously a non-compliance with the rear setback control, but there's obviously other provisions in the ADG and SEP 65, etc., relating to provision of adequate amenity to neighbouring properties. I'm keen to, and again, part of this might be more questions for council, but in terms of, was it approved as a habitable room? Were they approved as habitable rooms, given that they're on the boundary? Did that development occur prior to or after the development of 1016, 1018 and 1020. Did they occur? Did they provide the 6 metre setback or the whatever the setback is for that laneway in response to it already being there? But obviously there's the natural light provisions under the National Construction Code. And yes, I know that there are ventilation provisions as well, but so it does probably in some part come back to what it was approved at, whether it was approved as a storeroom, is probably, the design that's before us could have a different approach to the fact that if it was approved as a habitable room. But I'm just wondering whether you did any investigations yourselves on the status of the DA's, the DA for that development and adjoining development to inform the design, and whether you did investigate design options that would preserve natural light into those rooms, so setting back from them. So I'm keen to understand what you did to try and maintain that amenity.
Yeah, sure. Look, it was the setback to that particular boundary was something that was identified by council reasonably early on in the process, and the focus for council and the proponent was what was happening in relation to the residential component relative to that boundary. I guess the only way I can answer it is if the panel were so concerned in relation to what is happening in front of that window, then certainly the applicant would be prepared to, and I'm speaking for Sean and Mo here, but we wouldn't want to see the application refused on the basis that you had a concern in relation to that particular glazing element on the neighbouring property. So look, all we can do is concur with the assessment report that the impact to that particular room is acceptable, but certainly make it very clear to the panel that if that is something that is an impediment to you supporting the recommendation, that I'm sure that Sean can come up with something that provides some relief to that particular window element. It's a single story element that sits in front of it, so it's not like the whole building needs to be pulled back. But I would think that there is some scope in relation to that services storage area. And the OSD above to provide a 1 metre setback or something similar, just to enable some light to come in over the top of that landscaped planter above into that window that's on the ground floor. And in relation to the upper level, I think any sort of movement back from that edge in front of that window would certainly remove that impact.
Okay, look, thank you, because it's certainly, I think it'd be fair to say that is a concern, and we are endeavouring to find out from council officers the what was the nature of the approvals next door at number 26, so that we know the lie of the land, so as to speak. But it's certainly of concern from an amenity and livability viewpoint. I had a question too that related to lot 24 and the number 24, Ocean Grove, and the current status of the drainage easement or proposed drainage easement. Can you just bring us up to date there, please, Greg?
Look, Mo, do you have any sort of update in relation to that at this stage?
Mo, your microphone is off. Would you mind unmuting yourself, please? There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I've approached the vendor of 24 Ocean Grove and presented the easement. I don't think he had any objection, but when I spoke to Sean, he said, don't do anything at this stage until we get the DA approved, and then you apply for the easement and get it approved from the neighbors, and continue the process after that.
Okay. So from your perspective, the neighbour is in accord with your plans?
Yep.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Can I
look?
add?
Yeah, sorry, Cara, you go.
The questions that I had in relation to this, which you'll probably answer, Greg, is understand. I mean, we've got the council report that addresses that issue. That's why it was good to get a bit of a status update. But there are obviously, when we read the submissions from that owner does raise concerns and some valid concerns about the design and the likely impacts. We've only got a plan that's very basic, and I guess the concern, and you would probably be aware of this, is this issue of the level of detail that's required to be provided prior to issuing any consent, including a deferred commencement condition. Having the ability to meet the provisions of 4.15 of the Act, specifically 1B, the likely impacts of the development, and that there are a number of court cases that deal with this very issue and deferred commencement conditions, and that requirement to have sufficient detail if a development is relying on something on an adjoining site, though making sure that there's sufficient detail to be able to assess the likely impacts of that development. And so I'm just wondering how far that's gone, because in the submission there are concerns that are raised, in particular about the width, structures that already exist within that area where not just the easement, but the easement for works would need to occur, the age of their house, etc. So how have the likely impacts of the development on that lot been able to be considered at this stage, which is a requirement prior to the issuing of any consent?
Sorry, I'm just I was just reading through the condition. So the deferred commencement condition requires the creation of that easement in relation to the installation of the stormwater infrastructure. My understanding is that would require a development application in itself to be lodged, so we've looked, certainly the investigation that we've done is that it's able to be constructed. There's obviously an ability to sort of bore or push the pipe rather than excavate it if there are structures or trees on the adjoining land. But I would have thought that there's sufficient certainty there that there is an ability to obtain that easement for it to progress by way of a deferred commencement condition as structured.
And has that level of detail been issued to either council officers or the neighbouring property at this stage to enable that assessment of the likely impacts of the development to be completed? Or is that something that you've just got but you haven't yet submitted?
Oh, look, we can certainly provide some additional information if the panel was after that, and we can turn that around reasonably quickly in relation to the path that the stormwater is nominated travelling, how we'd go about installing that pipework.
Yeah,
I think can I just mention, I think one of the things we need to do is just check, which I don't think, I just had a quick look at the documents I've got. There's a drainage plan that's referred to from iStruck Consulting Engineers. That's in the deferred commencement one, and that's I personally need to have a look at that and just see what level of detail's there, because the way the deferred commencement condition is written, it would appear that council's satisfied with what they've said. That's a practical solution, but I need to go back and have a look at that to make sure that I agree with that conclusion, and no doubt the rest of the panel would need to do the same.
Yeah. It goes to the overall assessment of that issue and also the validity or potential validity of being able to use deferred commencement condition in this respect. There's quite a few, as I said, judgments in relation to this. I think one of the most recent ones was Ballina versus something. But there's several, Greg, that deal specifically with this particular issue. So, yeah, as David said, it comes down to ensuring that their council already has and that we can see sufficient information that the likely impacts of development on that adjoining lot have been considered for the purpose of being able to issue a condition such as that.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Oh, look, all I can say is, look, the applicant has, it's been a reasonably long process, but we've been very responsive in terms of the issues raised by council, and when additional information has been requested, it's been provided. So if the panel or council requires any additional detailing in relation to that easement, we'd certainly be prepared, like the opportunity to respond to that. And also note that if the panel does reach the level of comfort in relation to the deferred commencement condition, that any adjustment adjacent to these windows on number 26 could also be dealt with by way of an expansion of the deferred commencement condition to enable council staff or the executive manager to actually sign off on anything that's submitted in response. So it could be a performance-based condition that the panel imposes in relation to what you want to achieve in relation to those windows, if that is in fact an additional setback in that corner.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Any other questions from panel members of either the objectors or the applicant?
I might just ask a question of
Yes.
the applicant, if that's all right. Just
sure, David.
In relation to the entrance to access to lift 3, the lobby on the ground floor. I was just wondering if it's probably more an architectural and design issue, so I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this, but just wondering why there wasn't direct access provided to that lobby rather than the convoluted way in which you get there from the entrance via lift 2 and the corridor all the way along the rear of the retail spaces. And whether or not it's possible, it looks to me like it would be possible. Is there any reason, for instance, that, the retail has to be that size in that location? Could you run a direct pathway from the footpath to lobby 3, for instance, and achieve a better access with a much safer and easier pathway?
Yeah, look, I don't think, obviously I'm not the architect, so but yeah, look, I think there'd be the idea was to have 3 retail tenancies. Are you suggesting that potentially the retail access be more centralised rather than off to the right-hand side? Is that right?
No, what I'm suggesting is that you might utilise part of retail 1 in order to provide direct access to the lobby that's behind it for access to lift 3.
Yeah, sure. Look, I'm pretty sure
some reconfiguration of that retail space.
I think really the issue is that it's a long convoluted way to get to the lift, and for that lift 3. Sorry, I can't quite. I've never
lift 3.
Lift 3. Thank you. And I guess there may well be a number of design solutions, but we are just a bit concerned it's too far. One of which may be, creating a direct access from the street in the vicinity of lift 3. But there may well be other options that present themselves.
Yeah, sure. Look, I think it was just finding that balance between maximising the retail frontage and activation to the street, and trying to do that by way of a single residential access point. Whether that's better placed, that entry point, sort of more central between retail unit 2 and 3, or whether another retail entry is incorporated adjacent to retail 1. That's probably just a design process that Sean needs to be involved with. But again, if the panel would like that to be investigated, we're certainly open to it.
Okay, thank you. Any
Actually,
other questions, Cara?
I did have one other, and I know that there's still a minor non-compliance with the rear boundary overlooking, I think it's the rear yard of 24 Ocean Grove, 14 and 12 Cliff Road. And I think in particular, one of them has a swimming pool right there on the boundary. With those rear balconies that are located within the rear setback area, sorry, I'm just trying to scroll to the plans. It looked like on one of the elevations that there was like a solid screen on part, but not necessarily all. And I just wondered, what's the detail there? Is that designed as a planter or something, you know, one of those features where you can't go right to the edge, so it avoids you being able to look down. You can look out, but not down, which obviously can assist with some of that direct downward looking to mitigate privacy impacts? Or is that just a solid wall balustrade, but right at the edge where you could still look over the top of it? Like, so that I just trying to understand the level of detailing there.
Yeah, sure.
I think it's on the sections actually.
Yeah, it was. Was it on the section? Yeah, because it's not showing it on the floor plan. So I can
probably easier to see on the sections.
Scroll to those. My that PDF on my computer's taking a break.
Yeah, I can't see the detail of that on the
we can probably look at it later, but
we'll look at,
there's
I can share
I think if you look at the floor plan, there's a
Which
notation.
plan number is that, please?
Yeah, so I'll if you look at plan D806, which is the level 2 plan, for instance, you'll see there's notations there in terms of an external blind, but I'm just not sure whether that relates to just the living area or not. But
Go back to the sections and elevations. I think it might have even been I saw it on. Is it on the elevation?
On the section, it is on some of them, exception, let me just see. There are planter boxes in some areas, and there are some balustrade walls, solid walls, but they're all pretty, they all look standard height. There's nothing there that's higher than what looks like a standard height balustrade.
Yeah, actually, it's not on the elevation. Okay. Is that something then that could be like included to, you know, where you use a planter so that you don't stand and then you have the balustrade instead of that, so that it just means that people can't stand right on the edge and look straight down? Is that something that could be included to assist in that respect?
Sure.
So, Greg, are you able to talk to the architects and just get back to us in terms of what the detailing of the balustrading is there at the rear?
Yeah, sure.
Please.
Yeah.
And perhaps also discuss that option that Cara just mentioned. And if you could, and just email information through to Heidi as soon as you're able to obtain it, that would be really helpful for us.
Yeah, because the planter boxes on the section are not necessarily shown on the plan as well. So maybe it's just a matter of some consistency there.
Yeah. So if you can get back to us with that detail, that would be terrific. Sure. Anything else from the panel? No. Okay. Can I thank everyone, the objectors and the applicant representatives, for your time in dealing with the matter. As I mentioned earlier, the panel will this afternoon have a closed session where we'll deliberate on this matter and we'll make a determination, that is, decide whether or not to approve with conditions, refuse, defer, whatever, in relation to the matter. But once again, thank you for your time. And those two items, 4.1 and 4.2, are the only public meeting items I have in the agenda today. So I now close the public meeting of the Northern Beaches Local Planning Panel and thank all of you in attendance. So if I could ask panel members just to stay online once everyone else has logged off, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.